What's up everyone, Ben with the BTC Sessions here, and this is your daily session.
Hodl that Bitcoin.
Before we dive in, just a couple quick things. Do check out my website, btcsessions.ca. This is where you can reach out to me directly and book your own BTC session. We can chat Bitcoin, wallets, proper security, whatever you like. All you need to do is scroll down to the bottom and there's a contact form for you there. Secondly, big shout out to sponsors of the show, Ledn.io. This is where you can use your Bitcoin as collateral for a Canadian dollar or US dollar loan in select international markets. So it's really simple. Basically, you go to the website, there's a slider where you can check out the required Bitcoin deposit for a specific dollar amount. And the application takes about 2 minutes to fill out. If you're successful, your bank account is usually funded within 24 hours. I've done it myself. It works like a charm. So if you are looking for dollars and you don't want to sell your Bitcoin to do so, this could be an option for you. On top of that, they also have a deal right now where if you use the link I've posted below and you're successful in obtaining a loan, well, you will get an additional $50 worth of Bitcoin allocated to your account. So with that, we will jump into the news. And today is going to be a very laser focused show. I am focusing specifically on Binance, the hack, some stuff that led up to the hack, and kind of a suggestion of how to deal with the hack and the fallout from that suggestion. There's a lot going on here, so let's dive in. So first up, Binance was hacked for 7,000 Bitcoin, which amounts to about $40 million. So these hackers, they were apparently very patient. In the words of Binance team themselves, the hackers had the patience to wait and execute well-orchestrated actions through multiple seemingly independent accounts at the most opportune time. The transaction is structured in a way that passed our existing security checks. Once executed, the withdrawal triggered various alarms in our system. We stopped all withdrawals immediately after that. So at current time, Binance has suspended all withdrawals from the system. They will not be allowing any withdrawals for about a week until they can figure out what exactly happened and if any other wallets have been compromised. Now, this did seem to come from a single hot wallet in their system. Now, the hackers executed various attacks using things like phishing, viruses, and other forms, and the company is still exploring it. They said there may also be additional affected accounts that have not been identified yet, which is the reason for the suspension of withdrawals, because if the hackers have access to other accounts that they're not familiar with, well, then, when they enable withdrawals, they could get hit again. So that's why it stopped. Now, this is particularly interesting because of a couple reasons. One of them beforehand was CZ, the CEO of Binance. He put out a tweet basically saying that, and he kind of got roasted for this one, but he said that if you store Bitcoin yourself or cryptocurrency yourself, then you are the one responsible for fending off hackers and so on and so forth, dealing with security, proper storage, all that kind of stuff. Whereas if you use a reputable, trusted third party, then you don't have to deal with that stuff yourself. And a lot of people were not too excited about that quote, and they said, hey, you are just a honeypot waiting to be hit. Just because you haven't been hit yet doesn't mean you won't be. And we can see that here. Exactly. This is the shining example of why you need to keep control of your own private keys and only have balances on exchanges if you absolutely need to. If you're executing a trade, if you're buying or selling, and in between, you need to get it off there because this is at risk. Now, I will say that Binance does have a special fund for this kind of thing, and it looks like the money will come out of that fund. Again, it's not too much that they can't handle. People will be made whole. The only person taking a hit here is Binance itself. But that said, it's still just kind of beckons to the fact that exchanges are inherently not safe. And with these assets that enable trustless wealth transfer, adding a trusted third party in the middle there only increases your counterparty risk. Now, what happened after the fact in dealing with this is kind of has taken the initial story of the hack and has created a lot of conversation. So this is a video of CZ here, CEO of Binance, talking about, well, maybe there's a possibility of rolling back the Bitcoin blockchain to undo that transaction from happening. And as you can imagine, if you're at all familiar with the ethos of Bitcoin and the people involved with it, this did not go over well. I mean, so this was posted by CoinSpice, but essentially what he was saying here is somebody suggested to him, and we'll get deeper into this in a moment, that, hey, if you take the private keys of the hacked account, then technically you could present this as a bounty to miners, an incentive for them to go back and make it as if this transaction never happened, and they can instead send the funds to themselves as a reward. And you could kind of divvy it up by hash power provided by various mining pools, and so Binance would not be made whole again, but the miners would take that reward, and it would be a disincentive for hackers to bother trying to steal large amounts from exchanges because they know that this could be rolled back. Well, yeah, the response was not good. So you can see there's some great popcorn memes happening here. It's just everybody was saying, like, if there's a rollback, crypto goes to zero. Speechless. What a shame. People were just kind of jumping on, and yeah, they weren't happy about it regardless. If you search Binance reorg on Twitter, you'll see a lot of people just saying how ridiculous this is. And not only that, saying how even if it were possible, which it is likely not, it would be so damaging to the ecosystem that it would 100% not be worth it. You have Andreas Antonopoulos weighing in here. A reorg to recover exchange losses is like a bailout for a bank mismanaging risk. Fortunately, it's so hard to pull off and so likely to fail that unlike banks, there won't be a bailout here. Those who fail security get to eat the cost. Not your keys, not your coins. Again, I mean, very succinctly put, kudos to Andreas for that. So now what is a reorg and how would that be executed? Essentially, what would have to be done is all of the miners have already been mining, including the transaction that happened, have been mining blocks of Bitcoin and essentially confirming transactions up to a certain point. What it usually happens is the longest chain with the most proof of work, with the most computing power behind it, is what the network follows. Well, what could happen is if you could convince enough miners to go back, so you would have to have more than 50%, you'd want way more than that realistically, you could technically go back to that point in time and start mining on top of the block before the attack happened and create a new kind of offset of what historically happened, saying that that transaction didn't happen and we're not going to include it. Instead, we're going to send it off to all of the miners, and then you start mining on top of those blocks and expending energy to create a new version of history. Now, this is incredibly expensive to do, but if enough time, or rather if not enough time has passed, if it's been a small amount of time, technically possible with enough miners on board. Or is it? Well, you could go back and do it, but there's a lot of risk involved there, and so the miners would want to be incentivized, which they would be with the 7,000 Bitcoins divvied up amongst them. Now, if you assume that all miners are on board with this, it's a little bit more executable. Let's say 100% of miners decided, yes, we're going to go back. The incentive works for us, and we'll get a cut of that. And yeah, we're fine with that. Well, they go back, but what if the market decides we don't want that? Well, they go back, they spend all this time and effort mining that new chain and creating a new alternative history of Bitcoin. Well, if people that are using Bitcoin opt and say, that's not what we want to do, well, then the incentive is with the original chain, with what originally happened, because you may have people saying, no, we're going to stick with this. We're going to use our own miners to mine this. We're going to make this the valid chain that we're going to follow. And you could end up with an instance of an actual split where there are two chains where somebody forks off, and there's an old version of Bitcoin and a new version of Bitcoin, one with the hack, one without. And if people want the censorship resistant one, then the value of that coin will be more, whereas the value of the coin with the censorship on it will be less. We saw this happen with SegWit 2x when it was building up in 2017. We had a futures market where people said, well, this is the proposed fork. People want to fork off and add 2 megabyte blocks in a hard fork, whereas other people want to stay on the original chain, stay as is, and just continue the way we are. And with the futures market, the 2x fork, the upgrade, the added megabyte for blocks, well, that one ended up being worth only a quarter of what Bitcoin was worth. And because of that, everybody backed out last minute and didn't execute the fork. Well, I think something similar would end up happening in this instance. Now, there is an interesting blog put out by Jimmy Song, and he actually crunches some numbers here talking about how pricey it would be to pull off something like this. And it gets pricier and pricier as time goes on. And he also talks a bit about the game theory, about how in the end, it ends up not really being worth it at all. So the person who originally suggested this reorg is Jeremy Rubin, who has been a contributor to Bitcoin Core. Again, people were not super excited about even the suggestion of moving forward with anything like this. In the end, CZ ended up saying, and I'll find it on the original article we were looking at here, he said, where are we? There we go. To put this to bed, it's not possible. The Bitcoin ledger is the most immutable ledger on the planet. Done. So he very quickly realized that even mentioning this was not kosher with most people, and he seems to be backpedaling quite a bit, and he said, well, hey, our company is just going to eat it, and that's the way it is. He is trying to work side by side with some other major exchanges to blacklist the coins that went to those addresses. But even that in and of itself could be tricky, because it kind of lends itself to, is Bitcoin fungible? And how many hops does it take before those coins feasibly have been through other people's hands? And, do we want a situation where if your coins that you've received 20 hops down the line were at any point in history associated with some sort of criminal activity, they're no longer any good? Imagine if every $20 bill you had in your pocket, if it had been used in any sort of crime, which is like all money, if that was no good anymore, it would be terrible. So yeah, I also think it's going to be a little rough trying to blacklist things. And I'm sure that the hackers are already considering that and figuring out how to tumble their Bitcoin. You could use things like mixers, coin joins, all that kind of stuff. Or you could just hop it around different addresses and try and disassociate it. But I guess we'll see. We'll see what happens. This is very reminiscent and reminds me a lot of the Ethereum hard fork back in the day. This was in July of 2016. And essentially what happened is similar situation, not exactly the same, but essentially there was something called the DAO. It was an experimental decentralized autonomous organization. And there was a lot of money in it, like $150 million. And well, guess what? Untested technology, somebody figured out how to siphon off about 60 mil of that. Well, the idea of a fork to reverse that was also put forward. But guess what? In this situation, it went ahead. And the fork is now Ethereum. So part of the reason that I'm not big on something like Ethereum and why I really value Bitcoin is because of exactly what we're seeing here. When this happened in Ethereum, the knee-jerk reaction was, we'll just roll it back. Blockchains up until that point were largely seen as, hey, it's immutable, it's censorship resistant, you can't reverse anything. And that was entirely proven wrong here. Essentially, they did roll it back. They did prevent it from ever having happened. And though it was a bit more surgical and precise, it was kind of contained because the funds were locked in a specific contract at the time. It still set the precedent that censorship on the Ethereum chain was possible and had been executed. And that's what resulted in the fork. And Ethereum Classic now exists because that is technically the chain that stayed with the original idea of censorship resistance. On Ethereum Classic, the hacker that took those funds still has the money, but it's in Ethereum Classic. And unfortunately, most of the miners went with Ethereum because a lot of the figureheads like Vitalik and everybody else involved, they advocated for this fork to reverse that transaction or those transactions. They advocated to reverse this. And so when you have figureheads like this, they tend to be elevated to a position where people will just kind of go with what they say. Whereas what we're seeing with Bitcoin right now is anybody suggests any sort of censorship where we say that, no, we don't want this transaction to have happened, and we start cherry picking, there is this immediate reaction where it's like, we are not going down that road, and everybody becomes very defensive. And you bet damn sure if somebody had attempted to do this, that I think it would be, at the very least, very, very contentious. And realistically, I think it would just utterly fail, and the people trying to do this would be left with a worthless token and their foot in their mouth. So that, my friends, is why I'm bullish on Bitcoin and I'm short on Ethereum and other chains that have figureheads and people that can kind of call the shots, and blockchains that are more or less not immutable, that are easier to change. It should be so hard to change things, and that's why I'm in Bitcoin. That's why I'm here. Anyways, guys, I'm gonna leave it there. I hope that I kind of covered everything here. Again, more information will be coming forth as Binance announces. Again, the withdrawals and deposits are both suspended for about a week now. It's said that the funds are more than covered by, it was about 2% of their Bitcoin balance that was stolen. So again, they still got 98% of the Bitcoin left. So should be fine, barring any other catastrophic things happening. But again, not your keys, not your coins. Get your coins off exchanges if they don't need to be there. So guys, I'll wrap it there. Thank you so much for joining me. If you have questions or anything was unclear, just hit a comment down below. I'll do my best to answer them when I can. If you want to help out the show, check out my website, check out the sponsor Ledn.io, link for that down below. Smash that subscribe button, the like button, the bell notification, because every single time this airs for the first time, I'm in the side chat chatting everybody up. And if you really like what you saw, you can always drop me a Bitcoin tip via the Lightning Network at my tippin.me account. And if you don't know how, I did create a video on it, so I will link that here as well. Guys, thank you again, and I will see you tomorrow for your daily session.